Good morning and afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you're having a great Thursday. We are back here with yet another video. We're going to be talking about two things today. The first one is going to be the potential heat wave that we're going to be seeing in the central United States towards the early portion of next week. But then we're going to shift our focus over to the southwest, where we're going to be talking about the potential for our first tropical storm landfall in the U.S. mainland this year, which will be likely impacting portions of Southern California, bringing the potential for some very heavy rain, some swells as well out off the coast, and even some winds sustained, some damaging winds too. So we're going to get into all of that here during the video. And before we get started, if you do enjoy, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with family and friends that will be impacted by these two weather events. We're going to start first by taking a look here at this morning's map. And as you can see, just as advertised yesterday, you have this really potent shortwave trough that is dug down here from Ontario and has made its way into the lower Great Lakes, bringing with it this backdoor cold front as that continues to progress through the Chicagoland area and into the eastern portion of the lower Great Lakes from Indiana and then eventually getting into Ohio. These storms towards Indiana, Ohio will have the potential to produce some severe weather. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but the point is this is going to be moving through the region very, very quickly. These storms are expected to be mainly quasi-linear, so not expecting anything in the way of discrete or supercells, just not the environment for that. But instead, it's going to bring a relatively strong line of storms as it continues to move through the lower Great Lakes and eventually getting into the Ohio River Valley later on this afternoon into the early evening. And behind that is some cooler temperatures. So again, because we're talking about a backdoor cold front, what that actually does is that helps to usher in some colder Canadian air. And so today, for the portions of the lower Great Lakes back towards the upper Midwest, you can expect to see some cooler than average temperatures, pretty much sitting anywhere between the 70s, possibly getting up into the lower 80s, depending on if we can clear out some of this cloud cover. But this relief is only going to be temporary. As we mentioned in yesterday's video, we are going to see that ridge, as we pretty much can see right here in the Four Corner states, eventually begin to expand into the region, increasing our temperatures through late this week and then eventually getting into early next week, where we do have the potential to see heat indices well north of 100 in spots. We will also get to that later. Take a look at the rest of the country. So the Northeast, a lot of cloud cover. And again, we have pretty much a broad area of divergence downstream of this shortwave axis. Here it is, by the way. This is the shortwave trough we're talking about. Downstream of that, we have quite a bit of divergence aloft, and you also do have some Atlantic moisture getting up into the northeast, which is causing a lot of this cloud cover. May see the potential for some scattered showers and thunderstorms later on this afternoon into the evening for portions of the northeast and New England. Your better chances for showers and storms, however, are really going to be not only just today, but going into the rest of the week. So closer to about Friday or Saturday, you can expect to see some of those more widespread showers and storms. We do have a conditional risk of severe weather also for portions of New Jersey back towards Pennsylvania. That is going to be regarding a little bit of a jet perturbation aloft and some localized areas of vorticity maxima. So there is a conditional severe threat for both New Jersey and PA, as well as the Ohio Valley. As I mentioned in the beginning, we'll talk about that here a little bit later on. Taking a look at Florida as well as the Mid-Atlantic, just like yesterday, you do have a lot of convection remaining off the coast. So areas of showers and thunderstorms remaining off the coast of the Carolinas. Meanwhile, you do see some of that convection making its way into the Florida Panhandle off the Gulf Coast. It's going to be, once again, as we've seen the last several days in Florida, a lot of shower and thunderstorm activity later on this afternoon. And that's expected to continue at least for the next couple days getting into the weekend. Last but not least, for the western half of the country, you see this very, very potent ridge axis that sits right across diagonally through the western portion of the United States, from the Four Corner states back up into the northwest. This is keeping conditions rather dry, with the exception of places like Arizona and Utah, where we have been seeing some of this monsoonal convection, so showers and thunderstorms at higher elevations. By the way, that also includes New Mexico. We will continue to see that today as we start to get some diurnal heating later on this afternoon. But again, that's going to be mainly for higher elevations. For the rest of us, though, we are going to remain rather dry, and that's going to be the case over the next several days as this ridge is expected to build eastward once this shortwave trough feature begins to move out of the Great Lakes region and through the Northeast and New England later on through the rest of the week. So let's take a look here at some of the models right now. We're going to start first with sort of our severe threat, and then we're going to go into our heat wave, and then we'll kind of end today's video in talking about the tropical situation out towards the Pacific. So we're going to take a look first at our convective allowing model, starting with the NAM nest. And we're going to turn our attention here to the Ohio River Valley. So here is our front, and by the way, this is as of 12Z. So as you saw based on the radar, that this front has actually progressed much farther eastward than the original model output. So the front's actually draped right now across much of northern Indiana back into central Indiana. So this is a little bit dated, but it still does bear relevancy. So as we go forward in time, you do see all of this convective showers and thunderstorms remaining pretty much frontal, right? We're not seeing a lot of discrete supercells here or really semi-discrete cells along this front. Everything is remaining quite frontal, and that's going to continue throughout the day. You do see some intensification later on into the evening, with even some showers and storms that fire on the back end of the front. So that's going to be interesting on how long these can last. It does show some helicity swaths, but again, the severe threat should remain rather low once that line moves through. And as we get into the evening for tonight and into Friday morning, you see that line continue to move off to the east. And that's where we start to see more of those widespread showers and thunderstorms for portions of the Northeast. And again, a lot of that having to do with that Atlantic moisture advection. And then you have your cold front that's moving from west to east, so that's providing the lifting source necessary for some of those storms to fire up, especially along the Appalachian mountain chain and portions of the Catskills. And that's going to continue again to move off to the east later on tomorrow into the afternoon and evening of Friday, before we see that low pressure system start to occlude. And we might get quite a bit of rainfall for upstate New York and portions of New England. It's going to depend on where this low pressure system occludes. So when we have an occluding low pressure system, sometimes it can spit out a couple of waves of showers before it eventually moves off. And that's sort of the latter stage of a low pressure system. When the warm front gets caught up by the cold front, you get that occlusion to occur because cold air is more dense. So cold fronts move faster than warm fronts do because it's more dense, and thereby it's going to catch up with the warm front and produce an occlusion. When you have that, these low pressure systems tend to take on this very broad hurricane characteristic. And what I mean by that is it literally looks like a land hurricane, but it's actually just a cyclone, a mid-latitude cyclone, that is occluding out and producing rainfall. So wouldn't be out of the question to see some heavy rains across upstate New York, getting back into Vermont, New Hampshire. And I know for my friends in Vermont, New Hampshire, you're probably sick of the rain because you've had a lot of flooding issues over the last several weeks. I don't expect this to be a major flooding event like we saw weeks ago, but we certainly will be seeing additional rainfall that you probably don't need right now. So let's also take a look here at the HRRR. Now remember, we do also have a severe threat for portions of New Jersey back into Pennsylvania, and that is really going to be a late night event. I think a lot of that has to do with this cold front as it continues to move through. And let's actually go a little bit updated with our model here. And you can see that cold front continuing to progress, very much in agreement with the NAM nest here, and that's going to continue to move off to the east. You do see, however, with the HRRR, a little bit more aggressiveness with this line. This would take us into late Friday night, into even Friday morning, or excuse me, not Friday night, Friday morning. So late Thursday night, early Friday morning, with this line of showers and storms as it moves through New York. Just to take a look here for a second, I want to see sort of the parameter space here. Let's go back to the contingent United States. As I said before, just to recap, the Ohio River Valley, I don't really expect much of a severe threat for you guys today. If anything, it's going to be isolated damaging winds at most, maybe some large hail because these storms are somewhat elevated. But as we go forward, though, the other severe threat is going to be New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And so I wanted to look here first at sort of the upper level map, and we do see a very potent shortwave trough feature, even as far up as the 250. Look at these winds, guys, 80 to, in some cases, over 100 knots of upper level flow, and that's pretty much southerly. So that's very, very strong divergence aloft and very strong winds aloft in the troposphere. Same situation with the 500 with our mid-level jet, anywhere between 50 to 60 knots of jet flow right over the northeast and getting up into New England. But what I wanted to also take a look at here is the 850. That's going to tell us how strong our low-level jet is. And as I mentioned, this low-pressure system is expected to occlude, and it does show a nice area of southerly flow and upwards of 39 to 40 knots. Let's take a look here at sounding and see if we can't pull that. And I hope it's going to work. It may not load for us. So you know what? Let's skip on that for now. But the point being, there certainly is a nice speed shear at the surface to where you could get some spin-ups with some of these storms. But again, threat of that is going to be very low because it depends on storm behavior, it depends on initiation. It also is going to depend on when that cold front can get there. There is a very nice moisture advection regime in this region. There also is expected to be some good veering there too. But it's really going to depend on the lift of these storms and initiation as well as storm behavior, because we do expect the severe threat to be later on into the early to late evening hours of tonight. So a lot of question marks there, but again, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, if any storms do fire, they will have the potential to rotate, so there certainly is a isolated tornado threat for you guys, and that's going to be later on into the early and mid-evening. Let's now transition to the other main storyline here for much of the country, and that's going to be the major heat wave that is expected to impact much of the central United States, getting down into the southern half of the U.S. We'll start first with the GEFS. As I mentioned yesterday, this is a very good tool to use. Really helps to provide you with an ensemble point of view, averages out a lot of the model solutions to where you can get sort of a general average on where the synoptic weather pattern is going. Not just that, but it also thereby gives you confidence in your forecast. So we're taking a look here. This is as of 6Z. This is the latest. Actually, no, it's not the latest. The 12Z we have, but it has not yet loaded yet. But the latest 6Z shows the short wave trough continuing to move off to the east, and that is of no surprise with the westerly winds. That is expected to just carry off to the east. But then we now see our building ridge of high pressure in the mid-levels, which subsequently will act as a heat dome for much of the central United States. This has been something that the GEFS has been showing for the last several days, and it really hasn't changed much. The only changes that I've seen, or the only fluctuations that I've seen, is that this hot air dome has receded a little bit more south in the lower Great Lakes. We've seen it expand more north and east. So there is sort of the fluctuation, that wobble there, but for the most part, it's remained very strong on the solution that would put the main ridge axis, or the center of it, if you will, in the central part of the United States going into early next week. And this will have big implications for who will see the worst of the heat. So this continues to sit pretty much throughout the week, although we do see a bit of a ridge collapse there as it contracts back into the southern half of the U.S. As I mentioned in yesterday's video too, depending on what happens with this upper level jet flow, usually when you have a hot air dome like this, any of the jet stream that rides over top of it and essentially sort of skirts along the edge periphery of the heat, you can tend to get some little jet perturbations that do produce some strong windstorms at the surface. So we saw that throughout the summer with those MCS complexes, the Boeco storms, the derechos that went through central Illinois. Similar situation here, but again, in order to really understand that, we're going to have to continue to monitor this and really get a better idea of what the ingredients will be. This is very far out still, but just looking at historical context, when you have a pattern like this, it is really not out of the question to see some little jet perturbations, these little troughs in the jet that can make these little kinks right here that can produce some localized damaging windstorms and go for a very long distance with a lot of that energy being advected north. So, something to consider, but at least in the short term here, the main issue that we have to really focus on is going to be the strength of this heat wave. Now, we're going to hop on over to the GFS, and as we talked about before, the GFS has shown a very aggressive approach with the temperatures. Let's start first with the temperature anomalies. And as we go forward here, look at these temp anomalies increasing. This is from 1981 to 2010 reference point, and you see very above average temperatures for the northern portions of the Midwest. This is the standard anomaly, 5.8 sigma. The mean is 75.82 at this time, with an anomaly about 33.95. Temperature, in this case, measuring out to 109, 110, 111. So when we're talking about 5.8 sigma, that's really referring to how many standard deviations from the mean. And so 5.8 sigma is very much above average, statistically speaking, and that also tells us that we could be seeing some record-breaking heat for portions of the Midwest. But again, this is the GFS interpretation. It does tend to be a little bit more aggressive here with the temperatures in comparison to the other models that we've seen, and we'll take a look at those here in a second. But very much something to note. This would take us, by the way, into Wednesday night. Wednesday night, we're seeing these kinds of temperatures. So it's really going to ramp up here as we get into Monday, but then eventually as we move into Wednesday, we'll see the greatest contrast in temperature anomalies near Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So the reason why this map is so helpful is because it really shows us how uncomfortably hot it can get for areas that are not used to the heat. So if we're seeing standard anomalies at 5.2 sigma or even 6, that is showing well above average heat and very much uncomfortable for areas like Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri that aren't used to this kind of heat this late in the season. I will say we have had major heat waves in August and September. It's not something that's uncommon, but what is uncommon is the strength of this heat wave that we could be seeing. So this is the GFS interpretation. Let's now take a look at the temperatures. And as we kind of talked about, the anomaly really showed it, right? So measurements of 102 to 104. You really see the heat crank up here towards the portions of Tuesday, or I should say the Tuesday evening time frame. Actually, I apologize. This would be Monday evening. Thank you, Monday evening. So this is showing temperatures of 117 in places like Iowa. Nebraska back towards the Missouri Valley region of 116, 113. We're seeing a lot of 113, 111. And as we go forward, that heat's going to continue to build till we see temperatures of well north of 100 in portions of Illinois. And this is now pretty much expansive. I mean, look how expansive this heat wave is. It pretty much encompasses that hot air dome that we talked about. So would it be out of the question to see this type of expansion? Because, again, the general pattern would show that, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. But what we have to really narrow down here is the temperature spread. Are we going to see this severe kind of heat starting early next week? So let's take a look at the European model. It tends to be a little bit more on the conservative side, which is not a bad thing. But it is showing temperatures right around 99, 102, 102, 103 with 96. This, of course, by the way, is just showing your high temperatures. So this is not talking about the heat index. We are just looking at the high temperature. So arguably it could be even hotter if we factor in the heat index and humidity. But this would take us, by the way, into Tuesday. Let's start all the way back here, getting into Saturday. You start to see that hot air really build into portions of the Central Plains, but getting even farther north into the Nebraska, Kansas vicinity, up into the upper plains. And then as we get into early next week, you start to see that heat build even back towards the lower Great Lakes. So temperatures well into the 90s and even 100s in spots. So right now, based on what we've seen thus far with the Euro and the GFS, we have a really broad temperature range of anywhere between, say, 99 degrees in the lower Great Lakes to about, say, 117. So it's a very large spread in temperature. We could probably say right now that the GFS is much more aggressive with the temperatures. So we'll have to probably put ourselves somewhere within that average. Let's finally take a look here at the NAM interpretation of temperatures as we start to get more of a longer run here into the early week. And it sort of situates itself with the Euro solution. Temperatures of 101 to 104, 96, getting up into the 80s back towards the lower Great Lakes. So really the NAM and the Euro in agreement. The GFS seems to be the more aggressive model with the heat. So I think a general range right now of 99 to about 110 is a really good temperature spread that we can expect for early next week into much of the central United States. I don't expect us to see record-breaking temperatures of 120. I think a nice spread of that would be plausible. Again, though, these temperatures are not factoring heat index. So if we're expecting to see temperatures anywhere between 99 up to 110, keep in mind our heat index could easily be well north of 105. So it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable for many of you in central portions of the United States. So we'll keep a close eye on that. The numbers really have not changed. The only thing that we have changed here is that we finally are starting to get our convective allowing models to extend out into early next week as we get closer to that date. So that's going to help to provide us more of a narrowed down spread of the data as opposed to just using the GFS and the European for our guidance. So this actually lends to a nice transition for what we can expect for California. Now, we are anticipating our first tropical storm landfall, this time for Southern California, which I think a lot of you out there are probably thinking, well, Brendan, I was not expecting out of all the places to get the first tropical storm landfall, it would be California. Well, the Pacific has been very active. It's also been very hot in terms of sea surface temperatures, so it is not out of the question to see this. But the reason why we're seeing it impact Southern California is because of this ridge. Watch what happens here on the North American model, because I'll use the NAM example because all the models are pretty much in agreement in terms of the overall synoptic pattern. This is the 500 millibar jet. This is what we refer to as the jet stream. Watch what happens as this shortwave trough moves eastward. You see your ridge begin to build. Now keep in mind, when you have a very potent ridge in the central portions of the United States, remember that our ridge, or our broad area of high pressure, the winds move clockwise, right? So we have clockwise flow through much of the central United States, and that's going to actually help the storm sustain itself and be steered into Southern California. So keep an eye on that. As we continue to see that ridge build over time, you do see Hurricane Hilary now moving into Baja California, eventually weakening as it interacts with land and interacts with friction that will significantly help to weaken this storm. And to be honest with you, I expect this storm to be tropical storm status as it makes landfall into California, but only very briefly. And the reason why is, remember, it's got to interact with a very potent San Andreas mountain chain, and that's going to certainly provide a lot of friction to this storm and weaken it significantly. What it's not going to do, however, is hinder the rainfall. And we are expecting a lot of that for portions of Southern California, especially Eastern California, I'm concerned about. And the reason why is because if we take a look here at the current drought monitor, we go back here a second. Oops. If we take a look at the drought monitor for California, notice how we have still drought conditions for Eastern California. Now, this does include Death Valley back towards Nevada and western Arizona, and it's not a surprise we're seeing drought because we are on the leeward side of the California Valley, and we are also in the desert. So this is typically a drought-ridden area, and it's, by the way, not even exceptional drought. The good news is, because of the monsoonal conditions, some of these areas have actually seen rainfall over the last few weeks, and so we're not seeing exceptional drought, but we are seeing a D1 designation of moderate drought for much of Eastern California. And the reason why that's significant is because even though the drought conditions aren't as bad as what we've seen in the past, this still will cause the potential for some flash flooding. We are expecting rainfall amounts to be anywhere between 6 to 10 inches in this area. So when your soil and your water table is very weak and very low, you can get a lot of rainfall to just run off. So we could see some flash flooding, particularly for Eastern California, as we get this system to move onto land. Because the land is so dry, water's just going to run off. So that's going to produce flash flooding for areas that are still experiencing drought, especially folks that live in the desert, because, you know, historically you guys are dry for a better part of the year. So that is certainly going to lead to flash flooding concerns. We'll take a look at the NAM nest here in terms of its rainfall. The NAM nest tends to be the most aggressive with putting out rainfall amounts. So we do have 4.12 as a value, anywhere between 1 to 4 inches of rain. We'll take a look here at the GFS interpretation. And as we go forward in time, you do see some values of locally 6 to 8 inches on the GFS. We'll now look at the Euro. Very similar situation. So there is very strong confidence in some of these rainfall totals. And keep in mind the NamNest didn't go as far out. So I do expect, though, the NamNest to be on the more aggressive end with our rainfall amounts. But we are seeing anywhere between 5 to 7 inches of rain for Southern California. And that is certainly going to produce some flash flooding concerns. Depending on where you're at, it may produce some mudslides. But I'm not really particularly sure on the potential for mudslides. I don't know if it's going to be an exuberant risk because, again, we're not dealing with a major drought situation in California. So that's good news. But if you are in Eastern California, so southeastern California, I do expect the biggest concern there to be flash flooding as opposed to the valley. If we were in a significant drought situation, I would certainly anticipate that our landslide potential would be much higher, especially if we had burning wildfires. That's, certainly a case of burn scars that could flood and produce landslides. But I really do believe that the greatest flash flooding threat, as I've said already, is going to be southeastern California. And I do expect this system, again, Hurricane Hilary has been named. I do expect it to make landfall briefly as a tropical storm before eventually quickly weakening out to be a post-tropical storm / tropical depression. So I really think the main threat here for California is certainly going to be brief damaging winds along the coastline initially, maybe even getting into inland portions of California before eventually weakening and just becoming more of a flash flooding concern. So we are expecting to see our first tropical storm landfall, this time for California. And we will continue to monitor the tropical weather out towards the Atlantic. So far, nothing to concern ourselves with, as we don't really see any signal of it making landfall in the lower 48. We are expecting the potential for some of those storms out to the Atlantic to produce hurricanes. We'll take a look at that actually right now, just to show you guys what I'm talking about. I don't want to just give you information and not show you what I mean. We'll take a look here at the Atlantic again. Here's Hurricane Hilary. It's expected to move northward, and it's going to really make landfall more so as a tropical storm very briefly before eventually weakens into a depression post-tropical system, producing mainly some damaging winds initially for the coast of California and points inland before then becoming a flash flooding threat. If we go forward, though, and take a look at what's going on in the Atlantic, you can see that for the Atlantic Ocean, we have a couple of systems, both with 40% chances of development. Here's the thing. I'll tell you guys right now. This is still very far out. 40% chance for each of these tropical waves. The ingredients out in the Atlantic is very potent for these tropical systems. We do still have some areas of Sahara dust to worry about, so this one's certainly in question. The one that the models have been really running with is this system out front, potentially becoming a hurricane as it really makes its way towards the northwest. But the question is, will it make landfall and will it maintain hurricane status? The models right now have shown some weakening as it gets closer to the lower 48, especially into the Carolinas. This would also be at a time where we expect our ridge of high pressure to collapse and actually have a jet flow move across the Carolinas into the mid-Atlantic. This would actually punch any of these storms getting close to the lower 48 and the Atlantic coastline away from the shore and out to sea. So there are still a lot of questions with these two Atlantic systems. I will not sit here and say that any of them are expected to make landfall at the moment. We will continue to monitor that and keep you guys posted. But at least as of this time, nothing to concern ourselves with. And we'll have to revisit this over the next couple of days as we get into the weekend and into early next week. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, as I mentioned before, be sure to like and subscribe and share this with friends and family, especially for our friends in California and the West Coast, as well as folks in the central United States that will be dealing with some very oppressive heat going into early next week. Be sure to also check out our consulting company, Prestige Weather. We do weather consulting and one-on-one individual weather consulting at only $5 a month. You can find information on that in the bio below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on the next video.